The first human ship to leave the solar system was not a warship. It was a small vessel called the Wanderer, carrying 50 scientists and diplomats who had spent their whole lives dreaming of the stars. They did not know what they would find. They hoped for wonder. They hoped for friendship. What they found was a galaxy that had been divided long before humanity learned to make fire. The Veth Dominion controlled the inner regions of the galaxy. Closer to the bright core were stars clustered thick as sand on a beach. The Veth were tall creatures with hard shells and many limbs, and they had built their empire on a simple idea: the strong take from the weak. For 3,000 years, they had conquered species after species, demanding tribute in resources and labor. Those who refused were crushed. Those who submitted were allowed to survive, but never to thrive. On the opposite side of the galaxy, the crystalline hegemony held the outer rim. They were not organic at all, but beings of living crystal that grew over centuries and thought in patterns humans could barely understand. They viewed organic life as primitive and dirty, useful only for mining and manufacturing. Their subject species lived in conditions that would have horrified any human observer, treated as tools rather than people. Between these two great powers lay the territory of the Sarthan Empire. The Sarthan were the oldest spacefaring species anyone knew of, with records going back 10,000 years. They had feathers and sharp beaks and eyes that could see heat as easily as light. They believed their long history proved they were superior to all younger races. And they watched the conflicts between the Veth and the hegemony with the patience of those who expected to outlast everyone else. When the Wanderer appeared at the edge of known space, all three empires noticed. They had seen this before, many times. A new species discovers faster than light travel, sends out its first explorers, and then must choose which empire will it serve. The question was never whether the newcomers would submit, only to whom the Veth move first. They sent a diplomatic vessel to meet the Wanderer, though their idea of diplomacy was simply conquest with better manners. The Veth ambassador, a scarred veteran named Taraxis, delivered the terms. Humanity would become a vassal state of the Dominion. They would pay tribute. They would provide soldiers for Veth wars. In exchange, they would be protected from the other empires. The alternative was destruction. Captain Sarah Chun, commander of the Wanderer, listened politely to every word. Then she asked a question that confused Taraxis greatly. What do you offer in return? The concept seemed to baffle him. The Dominion offered survival. What more could any species want? Chun tried to explain that humans did not see survival alone as enough. They wanted partnership. They wanted mutual benefit. They wanted friendship. Taraxis reported back to his superiors that the humans were either very stupid or very strange. Probably both. They would learn the truth of the galaxy soon enough. The hegemony's approach was different, but no better. They sent an automated message offering protection agreements. That would give the hegemony control of Earth's mining operations and manufacturing capacity. In exchange, humans would receive hegemony technology and the privilege of serving a superior civilization. The message did not even bother to address any human by name. They were simply the new organics. The Sarthan sent no message at all. They simply watched as they had watched 100 other species emerge into the galaxy and be absorbed by one empire or another. The humans were small and soft and new. They would not last long, but Captain Chun had read enough human history to recognize what she was seeing. The galaxy was not so different from Earth in its darker ages, when empires carved up continents and treated conquered peoples as property. Humanity had learned, through centuries of blood and suffering, that such systems always fell eventually. The question was, what would replace them? She sent a message back to Earth, describing everything they had found. Then she made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. Instead of approaching the great empires, she began looking for their victims. The Wanderer's sensors picked up a faint signal from a nearby system. It was a distress call, old and weak, repeating on a loop for what might have been decades. Chun took her ship to investigate. What they found broke their hearts. The Keth were an aquatic species, beautiful beings with flowing fins and skin that shimmered in every color of the rainbow. Once they had controlled a dozen water worlds and built cities beneath the waves that rivaled anything the empires had made. Then they had refused to pay tribute to the Veth. Now they lived on only 3 worlds, their population reduced to a fraction of what it had been. Their technology had been confiscated. Their ships had been destroyed. They had been left isolated and forgotten, slowly dying across generations. The distress signal was ancient, from the early days after their defeat, and no one had ever answered it. Until now. Chun met with the Keth elders in an underwater dome. Wearing a pressure suit and breathing through a mask, she told them about Earth and about humanity's first steps into the stars. She told them about the Empire's demands. And then she told them what she wanted instead. Not subjects, not vassals, partners. The Keth elders looked at each other with expressions the humans could not read. Finally, the oldest among them, a being whose scales had faded to silver with age, asked the question that mattered most. Why? You could join the strong and be safe. Why come to us instead? Chun thought about her answer for a long moment. Because on Earth, we learned something important, she said. We learned that lasting strength never comes from domination. It comes from people choosing to stand together. One empire can conquer 1,000 slaves, but a true alliance where everyone benefits can change everything. The old Kath made a sound that the translators rendered as something between a laugh and a sob. We have waited 300 years for someone to say those words to us, they said. We had stopped believing anyone ever would. The Alliance of Free Peoples began that day, in a pressure dome beneath an alien ocean. It started with 2 species who had nothing in common except a belief that the galaxy could be better than it was. The empires did not notice. They were too busy counting their warships and their tribute and their slaves. They did not understand that the greatest power in the universe had never been military might. It was hope. The alliance grew slowly at first, the way all important things grow. The humans and the Keth could not offer each other military protection or vast resources. What they could offer was knowledge, and knowledge proved to be worth more than gold. The Keth had spent millennia studying the oceans of their worlds. They understood water and biology in ways that human scientists found astonishing. Within 2 years of the partnership beginning, Keth biotechnicians were working alongside human engineers on research stations built in the space between stars. The Keth learned human manufacturing techniques. The humans learned Keth medical science. Together, they created technologies neither could have developed alone. The Moravni were the next to join. They were a nomadic species, descended from traders who had traveled the stars for countless generations. They had no homeworld anymore because their homeworld had been seized by the Sarthan Empire 1,000 years ago as payment for debts their ancestors had owed. Since then, the Moravni had lived on their ships, traveling from system to system, welcome nowhere for long. The great empires saw them as pests, little better than parasites. The Moravni were denied docking rights at most major stations. They were forbidden from settling on planets. They survived by trading in the margins, carrying goods to places the empires considered too small to bother with. A human diplomat named Marcus Webb spent 3 months living on a Moravni convoy, learning their language and their customs and their songs. When he finally met with their council of captains, he did not ask them to submit or to serve. He asked them what they needed. The Moravni captain who spoke for the council was a weathered female named Sareth. She had been trading since before Marcus's grandparents were born. She had seen many species make many promises. She did not trust easily, but she listened. "We need ports," she said finally. "We need places where our children can walk on solid ground. We need to be seen as people instead of inconveniences." Marcus nodded. "The Alliance can offer all of that," he said. "In exchange, we would ask only for your knowledge of the trade routes and your willingness to carry Alliance goods alongside your own." Sarah studied him for a long time. "The empires will not like this," she said. "They keep us weak deliberately. If we grow strong, they will move against us. Then we will face them together," Marcus said. The Moravni joined the Alliance, and everything changed. Their trade routes, which the empires had ignored for centuries because they connected only small and unimportant worlds, suddenly became the veins through which Alliance goods flowed. Medical technology from the Keth reached species who had never been able to afford such things. Human tools and machines arrived in markets that the great powers had never bothered to serve. And everywhere the Moravni went, they carried something more valuable than any cargo. They carried stories of a young species that had arrived in the galaxy and refused to play by the old rules. Stories of an alliance built on partnership instead of domination. Stories that made people wonder if maybe things could be different. The Druun heard these stories and sent a message to the Alliance asking if the tales were true. The Druun were a mining species, strong and patient, who had once lived on a world rich in rare minerals. The crystalline hegemony had come to their planet 3 centuries ago, offered them a contract that seemed fair, and then exploited every loophole until the Druun owned nothing and worked as laborers in their own mines. When the mines ran dry, the hegemony had simply left, abandoning the Druun on a world they had stripped bare. Now the Druun survived on asteroids and barren moons, extracting resources from rock that the empires considered worthless. They were experts at living on nothing because they had no choice. The Alliance welcomed them eagerly. The Druun taught humans how to build colonies on harsh worlds, how to extract water from ice and minerals from dust. In exchange, the Alliance gave them something they had not had in 300 years, a voice. The Druun sent representatives to the Alliance Council, where they sat as equals with humans and Keth and Moravni. They voted on decisions that affected everyone. They mattered. By the 15th year after first contact, the Alliance included 12 species. Not one of them had been a great power. All of them had been forgotten or ignored or abused by the empires. Together, they were beginning to become something the galaxy had never seen before. The first real test came at Polari. Polari was a small world in a system that no one important cared about. Its people were farmers and craftsmen, not warriors or scientists. They had no strategic value. They had no great resources. They wanted only to be left alone. But Polari sat at the junction of 3 major Moravni trade routes, and the Veth Dominion had finally noticed that something was happening in the spaces between empires. They sent a fleet to Polari with a simple demand: submit or die. The old way would have been to send warships to fight the Veth. The Alliance did not have enough warships to win such a battle. So the humans suggested a different approach. When the Veth fleet arrived at Polari, they found Alliance ships waiting for them. Not battleships, but hospital vessels and communication relays and cargo haulers filled with food and medicine. The Alliance ships did not fire a single shot. Instead, they began broadcasting. Every camera on Polari, every communicator, every device capable of recording images was linked to the Alliance network. And that network was connected to receivers on 100 worlds across the galaxy. When Veth soldiers landed and began rounding up Polari civilians, the galaxy watched. When families were separated and homes were burned, the galaxy watched. When children cried for their parents and elders were struck down in the streets, The galaxy watched. The Veth had done these things 1,000 times before. No one had ever seen it. Within days, the broadcasts had reached every corner of known space. Species that had tolerated the Veth for centuries because they had never witnessed their cruelty now saw it clearly. The Moravni announced they would no longer serve as Veth vessels at any port. The Keth declared medical sanctions, refusing to sell healing technology to anyone who traded with the Dominion. 17 neutral species quietly sent messages to the Alliance, asking how they could help. The Veth took Pelari. They won the battle. But something had changed that could never be changed back. The galaxy had seen the truth, and the truth had consequences that no fleet could stop. The Veth Dominion spent 5 years trying to crush the Alliance through force. They raided convoys and burned outposts and made examples of anyone who openly supported the human-led coalition. Every atrocity was broadcast to the galaxy. Every act of cruelty turned more species against them. The Veth commanders could not understand what was happening. They were stronger. They had more ships, more soldiers, more weapons. By every measure they knew, they should have been winning. Instead, their empire was slowly bleeding from 1,000 small wounds. Trade routes that had carried Veth goods for centuries suddenly became difficult to navigate. Ports that had always welcomed Dominion ships now found reasons to be unavailable. Engineers who had maintained Veth technology retired or moved away or simply stopped answering calls. Nothing violent happened. Nothing dramatic. The Empire just became a little harder to run every day. The crystalline hegemony watched all of this with growing concern. They had no love for the Veth, but they recognized a threat when they saw one. If the Alliance could undermine the Dominion this way, they could do the same to the hegemony. Something had to be done before the contagion spread further. The Hegemony Council, a gathering of the oldest and largest crystals, sent a secret message to the Sarthan Emperor. They proposed something unprecedented, a joint campaign to destroy the Alliance before it grew any stronger. The two empires would set aside their differences temporarily and eliminate this new threat together. Once the humans and their allies were crushed, things could return to normal. The Sarthan Emperor, whose name was Kethranax the Patient, received this message and considered it carefully. He was old even by Sarthan standards, and he had seen many things in his long life. He had seen species rise and fall. He had seen empires crumble. He had learned that patience often revealed truths that haste obscured. He did not answer the hegemony immediately. Instead, he sent observers to Alliance space. What they reported back surprised him. The Alliance was not building a military force to rival the empires. They were building schools and hospitals and research stations. They were teaching species to read and write in each other's languages. They were creating a communication network that let anyone talk to anyone else across vast distances. They were doing something that made no sense from the perspective of traditional power. They were making friends. While the Sarthan observers watched and reported, a human diplomatic vessel arrived at the edge of Sarthan space. It carried a single ambassador, a woman named Liu Mei, who had spent her whole life studying alien cultures. She requested an audience with the Emperor. Kethranax granted it because he was curious. In 10,000 years, no one from a species so young had ever asked to speak with him as an equal. They usually came begging for protection or trying to negotiate tribute. Liu Mei did neither. She came to ask questions. She wanted to know about Sarthan history, about their arts and their sciences and their philosophy. She asked how they had maintained their civilization for so long. She asked what wisdom they had gained over 10 millennia. She listened more than she spoke, and her questions showed genuine interest rather than calculation. At the end of 3 days of conversation, Kethranax asked her the question that had been forming in his mind. "What do you want from us?" Liu Mei smiled. "We want to learn from you," she said. Your species has accomplished things that mine can barely imagine. We are very young and very foolish in many ways. We could benefit greatly from your wisdom. And what would you offer in return? Whatever we have that interests you. Our perspective, perhaps. We see the galaxy differently than those who have lived in it for thousands of years. Sometimes new eyes notice things that old eyes have stopped seeing. Catheranax considered this. He had expected demands or threats or elaborate diplomatic positioning. He had not expected humility paired with confidence. It was an unusual combination. The Hegemony has asked us to join them in destroying your alliance, he said, watching her reaction carefully. Liu Mei nodded slowly. I assumed they would. May I ask how you responded? I have not yet responded. I wanted to speak with you first. And now that you have spoken with me? The old emperor ruffled his feathers in what might have been amusement. Now I am more curious than ever. You are a strange species, you humans. You have almost no military power. You control almost no territory. By every measure that matters in this galaxy, you are weak. Yet somehow you are changing everything. Perhaps, Liu Mei said carefully, we have found measures that matter more. Catheranax did not join the alliance that day, but he sent a message to the Hegemony declining their proposal. The Southern Empire would remain neutral. They would watch and wait and see what developed. It was what they had always done. But for the first time in 10,000 years, the Sarthan Emperor found himself hoping that the newcomers would succeed. The Hegemony's plan fell apart without the Sarthan's support. They were not willing to face the Veth Dominion and the Alliance, and potentially the Sarthan Empire all at once. They withdrew their proposal and began looking for other solutions. Meanwhile, the Alliance continued to grow. 30 species now. 40. Not through conquest, but through invitation. Each new member brought something unique to the coalition. Each new voice made the council richer. And slowly, so slowly that the empires did not notice until it was too late. The balance of power in the galaxy shifted. The breaking point came not with a battle, but with a choice. The Veth Dominion had been bleeding for decades. Their vassal states had been leaving one by one, not through rebellion, but through quiet departure. A species would stop sending tribute. The Dominion would threaten consequences. The Alliance would offer the species membership and protection. And the Dominion would face a choice. And a fleet to crush the deserters and stretch their forces even thinner, or accept the loss and appear weak. Either way, they lost. High Commander Vareth had served the Dominion for 200 years. She had conquered worlds and crushed rebellions and done everything she was trained to do. She was the most decorated officer in Veth history, and she was watching her civilization crumble around her. The final blow came when the Tarrant Confederation, which had been a vassal state since before Vareth was born, announced that they were leaving the Dominion to join the Alliance. The Tarrant were not a powerful species, but they were symbols. They've been loyal for 500 years. If they could leave, anyone could leave. Vareth was ordered to take a fleet to Tarrant space and make an example of them. She gathered her ships. She planned her attack, and then she stopped. She had seen the broadcasts from Polari and a dozen other worlds. She had watched her own soldiers commit acts that she had once believed were necessary, but now could not justify. She had seen what the galaxy thought of her people, and she had begun to wonder if there was another way. Vareth sent a message not to her superiors, but to the Alliance. She requested a meeting. The human who came to meet her was an old man named Thomas Okonkwo. He had been a diplomat for 50 years, and he had the kind of patience that comes from watching history unfold at its own pace. He met Vareth on a neutral station in unclaimed space, just the two of them in a small room. "You surprised us," he said. "We expected an attack." Varath's mandibles clicked in a gesture of uncertainty. I expected to make one, but I find myself unable to do so. Why? She was silent for a long moment. Because I have realized that we cannot win. Not the battle. Perhaps we could win the battle. But the war. The long war against everything you represent. We can kill your people and burn your worlds, but we cannot kill the idea that you have planted across the galaxy. And that idea is destroying us more surely than any weapon could. Thomas nodded slowly. What do you want, High Commander? I want to know if there is a place for my people in the future you are building. We have done terrible things. We have caused suffering beyond measure. Many species would celebrate our destruction. Do you mean to destroy us? No, Thomas said simply. We mean to invite you. Vareth stared at him. You would welcome us into your alliance? After everything we have done? The alliance is not about what species have done. It is about what they are willing to do together. If the Veth are willing to change, to treat others as partners instead of subjects, then there is a place for you. The same place as everyone else. No more, no less. Why? Vareth asked, and her voice held genuine confusion. Why would you offer this to your enemies? Thomas smiled. Because we were once like you. Humans have our own history of empires and conquests and cruelty. We learned that such things are not strength, but weakness. We learned that the species that stand together last longer than the empires that stand alone. We hope you can learn the same thing. But you have to choose it. No one can force you to be free. Vareth returned to her fleet and did not attack the Torrent. Instead, she went home and spoke to the Dominion's ruling council. She told them what she had learned and what she believed. Some of them called her a traitor. Some of them called her wise. In the end, the council voted to send envoys to the alliance. The negotiations took 3 years. There were many who did not trust the Veth, and with good reason. There were many among the Veth who resisted changing their ways. But slowly, carefully, a path forward was found. The Dominion agreed to release all their vassal states. They agreed to pay reparations to species they had wronged. They agreed to abide by alliance law. In exchange, they were welcomed as members, with all the rights and responsibilities that entailed. On the day the Veth formally joined the alliance, Vareth stood before the council representing her people. She looked out at the assembled delegates from nearly 100 species, many of whom her people had once oppressed. She expected hatred. She found something else. We have decided to give you a chance, the council speaker said. A Keth whose ancestors had suffered under Veth rule for centuries. Not because we have forgotten what was done to us. We will never forget. But because we believe that people can change, and that the future matters more than the past. Welcome to the Alliance. Vareth bowed her head. It was the first time in her 200 years that she had bowed to anyone. The crystalline hegemony watched the Veth's transformation with something approaching fear. If even the Dominion could be absorbed into this alliance, what chance did the hegemony have of remaining apart? They began their own negotiations, though they never called them that. They called them trade agreements and cultural exchanges and mutual defense pacts. But everyone knew what was really happening. The Sarthan were the last to formally join. Emperor Kethranax, now ancient beyond measure, gave a speech on the day his people entered the alliance. It was broadcast to every world in the galaxy, and it would be remembered for as long as anyone remembered anything. We have watched humanity from the beginning, he said, his voice thin with age but still clear. We thought them naive. We thought their trust in others was weakness. We believed that our 10,000 years of history had taught us all there was to know about how civilizations endure. We were wrong. He paused, his feathers rustling in the silence. The humans understood something we had forgotten. Empires last only as long as they can enforce their will. But an alliance of free peoples, choosing to stand together, can last forever. We are honored to add our voice to that alliance. and we are humbled to have learned wisdom from those so much younger than ourselves. In the generations that followed, the galaxy changed in ways that would have seemed impossible to those who lived in the age of empires. There were still conflicts. There were still disagreements. But they were resolved through negotiation and compromise rather than conquest and destruction. Species that had been enemies for millennia learned to work together. Cultures that had never spoken found common ground. And through it all, there was a story that people told. It was the story of a small and fragile species that had arrived in a galaxy of giants and tyrants and somehow changed everything. Not through force, not through fear, but through an idea so simple that the great powers had overlooked it entirely. The idea that strangers could become friends. The idea that cooperation was stronger than domination. The idea that hope, planted carefully and tended patiently, could grow into something that reshaped the stars. The humans had not conquered the galaxy. They had done something far more remarkable. They had helped it set itself free.